Hey everyone, it's me, Julian Greystoke. We're back with another book review. This was actually kind of a request from a patron. At some levels on my Patreon, you can do what's called bossing me around, where you get to make suggestions for videos you'd like to see me make. Now, I won't 100% always take those suggestions, but I try my best. One of my longtime patrons asked that I read another Terry Pratchett book, and I was like, you know what? I was meaning to anyway at some point soon here, so I'm going to use this as a perfect excuse. Yes, I'm wearing this coat in honor of the book. I don't have a red one. Yes, it doesn't go with the shirt underneath. I don't care. That book is Monstrous Regiment, which I had already been meaning to read because I used to love stories of girls dressing up as boys to do various things. Let's go ahead and read the synopsis real quick off of Goodreads. I'm going to use my phone here. Polly Perks joins the Discworld Army to find her brother Paul. It's not really the Discworld Army, it's an army on Discworld, but it's not the Discworld Army. It's actually the army of a tiny little, crabby little nation. But anyway. Ozzer cuts off her blonde braids, dons male garb, belches, scratches, and masters macho habits, aided by a well-placed pair of socks. The legendary and seemingly ageless Sergeant Jackram accepts her, plus a vampire troll, zombie, religious fanatic, and two close friends. The best man for the job just might be a woman. First of all, this is incorrect. It is not a zombie. It is an Igor who joins them. Very different, alright? Just gotta... There's a lot of mythology around the monsters in Terry Pratchett's Discworld, and an Igor would be very different from a zombie. But yes, so we have Polly, who is disguising herself as a boy to go into the military for her tiny little nation, and she is trying to find her brother who has disappeared. So she is signing up and being recruited, and we get all of her trials and tribulations of trying to disguise herself as a man. She thinks she's very clever, all of the ways that she's done it. But of course, naturally, things go awry, things don't go as planned. I'm going to try not to spoil very much of this book because it is a really fun read. The other great thing about Terry Pratchett is he is so quotable. Like, there were so many times in this book where I was like, I want that quote and that quote. I want all of these as tattoos. I'm going to see if I can find just a couple quotes just so you appreciate just how quotable this man is. "I don't want unnecessary violence, Sergeant," said Blouse. "Right you are, sir," said the sergeant. "Carborundum, first man comes through that door, run and I want him nailed to the wall." He caught the lieutenant's eye and added, "But not too hard." I love this one. "You take a bunch of people who don't seem any different from you and me, but when you add them all together, you get this sort of huge raving maniac with national borders and an anthem." I love this one. It's not lying when you do it to officers. If you're in the army, read this book because you will definitely appreciate it. And finally, the four lesser apocalyptical horsemen of panic, bewilderment, ignorance, and shouting took control of the room. There's so many amazing quotes in this book, but I'm going to stop now before I review like all of them. Nigel just knocked my notes down. Nigel has absolutely no respect for an officer, which, as we learned from this book, is probably the best way to be. One thing I'm going to mention right away that I forgot to mention in my notes is Polly has to learn to swear, so she keeps not swearing and then correcting herself to a swear. And then toward the end of the book, she has to be a woman again for reasons, and she has to like correct her swears the other way. I just thought that was the best little detail. Let's look at my notes here. I wrote, "I'm pretty sure this whole book was an elaborate excuse for the socks change pun." You'll get it if you read the book, but I was just like, Pratchett, did you have that joke in your head and write an entire book around it? Because I wouldn't put it past you. And of course, right below it, I did mention that Pratchett's writing is top-notch as usual. If you want to see some of the most solid, snappiest writing you will ever see in your life, read Terry Pratchett. That's not to say that he's for everybody and everyone will love him, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but just the quality, he's got the juice. His style is just so very much him, and listening to it, because again, I was listening to the audiobook, I was just trying to soak it in as much as possible. I was trying to be a sponge and be like, look what he did there, I see what he did there, could I do something like that? Learn from this. I hope I picked up at least a little bit of it, because the man, he knew what he was fucking doing. I'm not sure if I recommend 100% that you need to read other Discworld books to read this one. It is a standalone, because he has several series, and he's got his Watch series and his Unseen University, and there's ones about the witches, and he's got a bunch of different like series that you can kind of dive into at any time. Like I've read several of the books about the Watch because they're the ones that interest me the most, and I just like jump in and am able to follow what's happening pretty easily. That said, there are a lot of Discworldy things in this book that you're not gonna get, just gonna go whoosh, and you might feel like they're in there kind of pointlessly if you haven't read other Discworld books. So it might be worth it to read other Discworld, maybe some of the Watch, because that's the one that ties like most closely in with this one before you read this one, but it's not necessary. Just know that if you're reading it and there's things in there that you're like, what is this and why is it here? It's probably tying back to the other Discworld books. On that note, this book needs more Vimes. Commander Vimes, my favorite of the Discworld characters, besides Death, of course. Everybody loves Death. But I love Vimes. He's great, and he's in this a little bit, and not enough Vimes. Book needs more Vimes. The characters in this book are what really held it up for me. As usual, I'm a big character reader, and I liked Polly a lot, but honestly, the side characters, like her commanding officer, Jackram, would die for Jackram. Seriously, he could lead me into a deadly battle at any time, and I would 100% follow him. I loved most of the monsters. I loved Igor. I loved the vampire Maledict. The characters really kind of elevated this book for me, whereas if they hadn't been quite as interesting, it might not have gotten as many stars as it did, unfortunately. Again, we'll talk about that. Some of the characters did run together. There are some characters in their little unit that aren't as pronounced, and so I kind of tended to get them a little bit confused, especially since they didn't really start to come into their own with their own real abilities and personalities showing quite so much until the end of the book. Like, they had little hints of it throughout, but it wasn't until the end where I kind of had a solid handle on who was who in the rest of the unit. I love the discussion of gender and how performative gender is. It was really fun to see like Polly's frustration with all of the effort that she puts in to dress as a man, only to find out that all she really needs to do is wear pants. And to switch back and forth, and how easy it is for her to switch back and forth. I really feel Polly because we have the same body type, and how just exasperated she is by how stupid gender norms are and how performative they are. I mean, this book was written in the 2000s, I believe, or at least came out in the 2000s, so it's not like it's like old, but it still is a bit older and seems like it's ahead of its time with just like this discussion of how fluid gender really is as a societal construct. Also, this book is a great example of a man writing a woman who doesn't do it in a cringy way. He even has to bring up her chest because she talks about having to hide it, but he doesn't do it in that gross, cringy way that so many men fall into. It was so nice. And also Polly is like built like me. She's a small-chested woman. She's slim. It's easy for her to go masculine, which is very easy for me as well. I play a lot of men on stage because it's very easy for me to go either way. So it was nice to see that also he wasn't making her like super gorgeous with giant hips and titties that she had to try to hide. It was like, no, she has a body type for this. Alright, now we can talk about one of the pitfalls that I run into with a lot of Pratchett, and why I don't like devour everything of his, is that, and it happened in this book too, his writing is there, his characters are there, his plots are slow and meander, and you kind of lose the thread for a while. And that happened in this book too. I was enjoying it whenever I was listening, but I also really struggled to pick it back up. Like, it took me longer. It took me like 2 weeks to listen to this book, when normally it might take me 1, because I just wasn't as excited to pick it back up. Because a lot of times when I'm in a book, when I'm listening to it, I'm enjoying it for the characters. But when I go to pick it back up, I have to think to myself, what was the plot doing, to kind of remind myself like where I was, and if there wasn't really anything happening, it's really difficult to get me to pick the book back up. There was a plot, they were driving towards something, but they were doing it very slowly. And the meandering was fun to be with these characters as they're exploring Discworld, and Pratchett's writing, of course, amazing. But also, if you don't like a slow plot, the Pratchett's books in general might not be for you. I also wish the monsters had been more useful than they could have been. By the way, I just want to point this out. Pratchett is being a very, very clever boots, if you didn't know, Monstrous Regiment has a couple of different meanings. Monstrous not only refers to the monsters in the regiment, but monstrous used to be a bad slang term for women. But yes, back to the monsters. I really wish they had been used more. The Igor gets the most use. He's their medic, so he's obviously got a lot to do, and I really like learning more about the culture of Igors. They also have a vampire and a troll who do more at the beginning of the story. The vampire doesn't actually do very much. The troll gets some heavy lifting, literally. But then at the end we have to find a way to get the monsters mostly out of commission because they would be too useful, too powerful. So there's a whole thing with the vampire. Much of the book is taken up with slowly getting the vampire out of the way, in a manner that should be more worrying to the characters than it is. We'll talk about that in a second. But also, they have to leave the troll behind when they go on their final mission. So, little disappointing that the monsters didn't get utilized as much as they could have been. Though I know the point of the book is really the human characters. And it really does bring me up to the vampire thing I was just talking about, where they're slowly building up to a way to keep the vampire out of the final section. And I'm gonna, reveal what it is because it's not, a big plot point, but vampires, if they don't drink blood in Discworld, they need to find another addiction, and Maledict is addicted to coffee, and then something happens to his coffee, and so he's slowly starting to revert back to a proper vampire. And I don't feel anyone is adequately reacting to the fact that any second one of their companions could go feral and start eating all of them. No one seems adequately distressed about this possibility. They're just like, oh, Maledict, stop being such a baby about your lack of coffee, and I'm like, he's going to kill you. There's also a obese character, Sergeant Jackram, the one I said I would die for. And at first when we got introduced to him, I thought, oh no, this is going to be another fat equals bad. But then he turned out to be the best character, and once again, I should know to trust Terry Pratchett. He's going to do well with a character that you think is going to be a stereotype. He's going to make it something else. And I love him for that. And Jackram is just absolutely amazing. And finally, I didn't really love the ending of this book. I did and I didn't. I understand why he went the way that he went. It fit with some of the themes that he was going for in this book, but it also kind of took the legs out of other things he was going for in this book. Ultimately, I decided I didn't like the ending, but other people might really like the ending. Obviously, I'm not gonna spoil it. That was my review of Monstrous Regiment. Have you read it? Are you a Pratchett fan? Have you read any Pratchett at all? I won't even tell you which one to start with, because honestly, I am not a Pratchett expert. I'm sure there are lots of people who read way more Pratchett than me. You can go on their channels and find out where you should probably start with Discworld. I think this one would be an okay place to start, but there were, like I said, a lot of little things in there that you kind of need to know about Discworld to understand. You kind of had to have read other Discworld stuff. But overall, it was a fun time. I gave it 4 stars. I think I would probably give it 3.5 ultimately, because of the ending and because of the meandering pace that it had sometimes. But I love the characters and, of course, the writing. The man knew what he was fucking doing. Thanks so much to my patron for suggesting this. Thank you all for watching it. If you like book reviews, there are a ton more here on this channel, so go check them out. All arranged in a handy dandy playlist for you. Easy to find, easy to navigate. Now Nigel's being all chill. Before, it's whacking me in the face. Cat hair all over my lips. Whatever. If you want to see even more from me, you can hop on over to my Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month, you get access to exclusive content not ever seen here on this channel, including stuff about my pets, as well as my own writing, as well as lots of other random stuff going on. Speaking of my own writing, if you would like to read my book, I have one out recently, The Wolf and the Hawk. It's a fantasy romance, but it's a romance with a plot, so if you like some kissing but also some killing, that might be the book for you. No, it will not hold up to the Pratchett standard, but who can, really? And I will see all of you again next time with whatever it is I happen to be doing next time. Bye!
Oh, hello! What brings you here to the end of the video? Is it patrons? I bet it's patrons. Patrons like Very Bad Books, Anna, Belle, Patrick, Anne Sophie, Callison, Ray, Artemis, Shelby, Zaire, Jesper, Irene, Scribbling Cat, Savvy, Jenny, Amanda, Lisa, and Sarah. Why, I can't think of a better reason that you would come to the end of this video. My patrons are awesome. And to think I did all that, and may I say, not in a shy way, oh no, not me, I did it my